Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sarah Petrie. I'm the Director of Partner Technical Solutioning. At Sauce, we invest very, very heavily in our partners from a technology standpoint, from a go-to-market standpoint, and just from a general, let's see how we can make this industry even better than it already is standpoint. If you know anything about Sauce, we really, really love open source, which means that we don't believe in doing everything ourselves. We don't really believe in vendor locking, and we don't believe your tools should dictate how you do everything. So from where we stand, it's a lot of why we believe in open source. It's a lot of why we invest in our partnerships as well. And so my role as the Director of Partner Solution Engineering and Partner Solutioning is to co-solution with our partners to enable them to be successful. And then my background is actually in pre-sales and solution engineering. So you see some logos on my slide. I actually started out my career at HP Software back when there was an HP Software. And so from a testing perspective, I learned the ropes on all the former Mercury solutions and all that technology that so many of us either used in the past or were familiar with. I was with HP through its whole identity crisis as it became HPE, or Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and then as it was acquired by Micro Focus. After that, I went and spent some time at a company called Sharewell Software based out of Colorado Springs. And then I've been at Snapshots for about 2 years now, and I'm very thrilled to be here. So you can see there's a picture of me. There's a picture of my husband and our 2 dogs, our 2 little fur babies. My husband is an Air Force pilot, so we actually live in the middle of nowhere in Florida. And there's a picture of the plane that he flies. So that's our little family for now, with a future saucer on board coming in August. Let's get into the good stuff. Now you know why you're here. Now you know why you're listening to me. Does this look familiar? Have we heard this before? Digital confidence? Did someone maybe mention it earlier? So what's the goal for everybody? What are we really trying to achieve? Digital confidence, right? And it's a really, really nice, fancy sounding term. And what does that really mean? Larry broke it down for us a bit before, but there's so much to digital confidence. And I believe a lot of it has to do with, at the end of the day, you want to feel confident every single time you release your application. And that encompasses a lot. That encompasses everything from how frequently you release it. You want to feel good about how frequently you can release your application. You want to be able to do it as rapidly as your consumers demand. And how do you do that? Well, part of that is by intentionally making sure that your process and the tools that you're using allow you to move quickly enough to release often without compromising on quality. And it's a very, very old now. It's something we're very used to talking about. Do we choose quality or do we choose velocity? And our mission at Sauce is very much to free you of that choice. We believe that you should be able to do both. And our role in that is in the testing space. You cannot achieve that quality without testing. And yet, traditionally, testing has been a bottleneck. It's such a necessary thing, but the tools and the processes around testing haven't always enabled us to move as quickly as we want to while still guaranteeing quality. So what have we had in the past? Well, there's manual testing, which out the gate, that's not going to scale. Maybe once upon a time it would do, but not so much anymore. And thank goodness, when automation came onto the scene, we were presented with tools around functional testing, around automated performance testing, around API testing, service testing, or making sure that your application is performing in a way that's expected when it interacts with another service or it makes a call outside of your application. So these are all available to us now, in addition to some others like business process testing. But what do we really accomplish? So with functional testing, we're making sure that our application behaves in a way that is expected when confronted with a very specific business flow. With performance testing, we're making sure that the backend still supports the business needs under load or under stress. And for service and API, again, it's ensuring that the relationships between application and dependent services remain intact each time a call is made. I do want to drill down. We're going to spend some more time on functional testing, and we're going to take a look back at what I'm going to call the nostalgic modern history of applications. Putting this together took me down a few rabbit holes, so you're gonna have to bear with me. I hope that you have a little bit of fun with it. I had some fun with it. Feel free to drop some comments and responses into the chat as we go through. So when I first entered the testing space and I learned about functional testing, I was actually really surprised to learn what it consisted of. The idea of it only being a test of clicking this, that, making sure that just one click stream functioned, that to me, I was surprised at how limiting that was. And some of you have maybe been in this industry, in the testing space for much longer. Maybe you've just grown accustomed. It's easy to grow very accustomed and numb to some of those limitations, and just to get used to working with essentially what we have. But automation, thankfully, has been a real godsend in this space because we can scale that at least. We can test many business workflows. But while it's critical, again, it's limiting. And when I think about some of those other areas that we talked about performance and around API and service testing, those are completely different areas. And when we're talking about testing the UI, testing the user experience, which is so critical, I start to think that maybe functional testing, again, while still necessary and while still fantastic, by itself today, maybe it falls short. And that's why I thought that, I was sounding a little judgmental in my own head towards functional testing, which is silly because at Sauce we love functional testing. And then I just realized that it's aptly named. It's functional testing. It is meant to test the functionality of the application. And that's exactly what it does. But it doesn't really do anything more all by itself. Now I'm going to go back into a little bit of why functional testing has come from where it has and why it needs to evolve with us. So the world that I grew up in, I don't know about the rest of you, but there were either no mobile phones, or there were brick mobile phones, and then there were flip phones. And the idea of using any of those to, what do we used to call it, surf the web, was completely absurd. Because even when they offered that sort of functionality, when it made its debut, the connection was so slow and the amount of data that was consumed was so high and with such expensive rates that it was more of a marketing gimmick and a sales feature than anything else. And I hope you're enjoying some of these images. This first phone, this brick phone, by the way, it's a Motorola Dynatec 8000X, and I found this image. It's on eBay, by the way. It's listed for a little over $6,000. So if you need a new phone and you're looking to shake things up or maybe be a little more hipster, that is a very bold approach, if not a little bit pricey. Similarly to mobile and the mobile experience, there was a parallel with web applications. Our expectations for the speed of an internet connection used to be so low that by today's standards, waiting for a page to load was like waiting for the page to be carved out of a stone tablet. I mean, I remember I used to, go to load a web page and I'd click it, or I'd send the URL request and I would get up and go make a snack because it was going to be a while, especially if it was a graphically heavy page. And I thought that this was a pretty great AOL, early AOL interface. I mean, this is what we used to work with. And then Yahoo, on the other hand, they kept everything even leaner because, as we know, when it comes to architecting your web application, the more images you have, the more that is leaning on the back end, the more that has to load, the longer everything is going to take. So what this really resulted in was just more raw functionality-based applications. And they were functional if you had a lot of time to spend waiting for them to load, but it also resulted in some pretty unsexy user interfaces. And as I was saying, any additional graphics, any additional attempts to dress up these applications ended up being counterproductive because it made the site even slower, which made it, when we're already looking at slow load times, it was just not even usable. So what this really resulted in was that at the time, functional testing was absolutely adequate because there was so much less going on in these applications. So many fewer business processes, potential business processes, and fewer click streams. And we also had much lower expectations as the end users. So again, you look at this Yahoo homepage and there are only a very, very limited number of things that you can click. So from a testing perspective, you could probably get away with manually testing this. And if you added a few more links, enter automation and you're more than covered. And you don't really need to worry as much about whether everything's loading properly or rendering in a way that's visually pleasing or even in the way that it's supposed to. Because our expectations, again, as those end users and consumers, was that we didn't necessarily think much of that. It was so common, and we were as likely to blame our own connections and our own machines as we were the producers of the applications. I'm going to ask a really obvious question. What changed? Well, as the applications changed, something much more important inevitably evolved alongside it, and that's the balance of power. So by the balance of power, what I'm referring to is the fact that in those early days when the technology was newer to us, to the end users, to the consumers, and we weren't used to having access to all this information and to all this functionality, it was all extra. We hadn't built it into our lifestyles. So at the time, it was very easy for the technology, the IT departments, for whoever was producing these services that we were consuming, them and their technical limitations, they set the expectations for quality. And the rest of us end users, we just consumed whatever we were given. However, as the limitations on technology forced the expectations and of users and consumers to be low to begin with, as those limitations changed, the consumption of technology skyrocketed. And that meant this huge shift in power. As we consumed more, our expectations became much more critical. Instead of the technology and IT dictating expectations of quality, end users began to dictate quality expectations. That ranged from the speed with which we expected everything to load, the quality of the images, the quality of the navigation experience, how intuitive it was, all of these various factors, which now the companies producing the applications are now responsible for meeting our expectations, or, and this is a new challenge, new in the, not new, but new from back then, there's now competition out there. The explosion of technology opened the door to new businesses, many that were newer and flashier. And the gargantuan enterprises that predate the digital era could no longer rely on their status as some de facto 800-pound gorilla when there were leaner, faster new companies swooping in and snagging market share every time that 800-pound gorilla underestimated the importance and the quality of the user experience on its web application. And that was just the beginning. So if it feels like I got off topic, don't worry, we're exactly where I wanted us to be. But the reason we took this stroll down memory lane was I was hoping that you all would, when I was planning this talk, I wanted to take a step back and refresh my perspective. And ironically, refreshing my perspective meant going back a little bit and understanding why functional testing has the limitations that it does. And what I really understood was that functional testing was born into this world where automation, when you could automate functional testing, that more than covered the needs of businesses and more than covered the needs of these applications that, and also think about when they were being released, right? These applications were not having daily, hourly, weekly, even monthly releases. I mean, I can't even imagine. Quarterly might be ambitious. Some of these web applications may have had releases much, much, much longer release cycles than even that. So the velocity of testing and the coverage of testing were much less complicated. There was a lot less that we had to worry about. So if technologies become more sophisticated and expectations around it are at an all-time high and they're continuing to climb, It obviously wouldn't be very wise of us to believe that functional testing, as it was done a decade ago, is going to cut it in delivering the required level of quality on its own. So we do ourselves a disservice when we forget where we came from. We lose perspective and all too easily look at the tools that we currently have in our hands and say, well, this is what we have to work with. And it's been good enough for the past 10 years. So nothing needs to change, right? Well, wrong. The tools in our hands aren't bad. Functional testing is not bad, nor are they irrelevant, not yet at least. However, they aren't enough all by themselves anymore. Not if we want to achieve real digital confidence and if we want our applications to stand out in a way that's going to win our company's business and win the business and the loyalty of end users. So I'm going to go back here again, back to digital confidence, because again, this is the goal. So what does it boil down to? Digital confidence boils down to behind the scenes having that confidence in every single aspect of your release. From, again, being pleased with the duration between releases, the speed and the seamlessness of your deployments, confidence in the performance of both the front and the back ends, the quality of the code, and the metric that all of these things roll up into, the user experience. Because user experience is king. And so this is probably become a bit of a cliche now, but one of the first mantras that was nailed into my head at HP Software when I was first learning this space and was first coming into the QA industry was that user experience isn't everything. It is the only thing. And it was as true then as it is today. In fact, it might even be more true today. So I want you to ask yourselves these questions. How long will you wait for an application to load before moving on? If a link or a button doesn't respond, do you patiently keep trying? And if an application doesn't look right when you open it, what goes through your head? Me, if images are broken or missing or elements on a page are overlapping, I immediately view it as a reflection on whoever's page I'm looking at. So if that page belongs to someone trying to earn my business, that's multiple strikes against them right out of the gate. I may leave the application immediately and seek what I'm looking for somewhere else on the World Wide Web to, I can use a bit of an accurate but antiquated term. So what do we do? What do we do differently? I've been leading up to this. I keep talking about it, and I've got a big surprise twist. It's leading towards visual. So, but in the meantime, first we need to talk about what we may have to make sure that we don't do to respond to this. The dangers of overhauling process for tools. I mentioned towards the beginning that Sauce is a big proponent of open source. And if you're familiar with what Sauce offers now, you'll be familiar with the fact that we don't encourage vendor lock. When you run tests against a Sauce Labs platform, you use open source frameworks. The only thing that's specific about your tests is where they're pointed and potentially the capabilities that you're specifying to make sure that they're calling out the right virtual machine or the right device. What has traditionally been seen in the market is a lot of the legacy software companies and even some of the more modern software companies have tried to diagnose the issue and fix it by building a big, heavy process-laden tool. And for those of you who've heard the people, process, tools mantra, you should start with your people, look at who you have, look at the skill sets that you have, the personalities, the strengths that you have to work with. And you use those to then shape the processes that you're using. Because if you try and force processes on people who aren't going to fit into that process, well, that's going to lead to inherent inefficiencies and broken processes. And then the third one, the last thing that should be a factor is tools. So again, a lot of these traditional solutions, they were big, they were heavy, and they tended to force vendor lock because they would come up with this big solution that was, this is the fix. And they go out and they preach it and they market it and they advertise it and say, this is how you fix this. If you implement our solution exactly the way that we tell you to, then all of these things will go away. You'll realize all of this value. You'll see all these defects go away. But what that does is it steamrolls the other two things that, frankly, are much more critical and much harder to reshape. and that's the people that you have and the process that you have. So the answer is not to go out and find some tool that's going to, the answer isn't that you're doing everything wrong right now. It's that there's something out there that's a simpler answer that isn't going to cause you to reinvent the wheel and have to completely reinvent the team that you've hired and revamp all your processes, which for those who've been part of companies that have tried to do that is an extremely arduous process and is rarely successful. So the cure, ding, 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 surprise, surprise, is visual testing. And what Larry talked about before I came on really rings true with this. And it's that visual testing is so complementary of the testing practices that already exist. The testing practices that exist now are so deeply linked into the application lifecycle, into the pipelines. They're terms that are common phrasing, common terms now, like pipeline, like CI/CD, things that we had never heard of maybe 10 years ago. But Agile came on the scene, and process really started to shift. And so what we're seeing is, how can we take this process is good. This is a good process. This process allows us to be lean, to be agile, to release as confidently and as frequently as we want to. So how can we then make that better and release with even more confidence or renewed confidence? What can we add to this existing process without breaking it, without overhauling it, that will truly add value and take advantage of the expertise that we already have, take advantage of the investments that we've already made in skills, in technology, and then provide us with results that will then add value further and help enhance the quality of our releases. It actually sounds like a pretty big ask, right? Usually you ask for something, you go on an online forum or on social media and you say, I'm looking for this with this feature, and this feature. And you're like, I know, it's a unicorn. It probably doesn't exist. And you're always hoping, though, you've got your fingers crossed that someone's going to come back and say, oh, yeah, there's this tool. Go and get that. Well, in this case, we actually have that. Nothing is perfect. And I really never want to sound like I think little of functional testing, because, again, it's so critical. And Larry had this slide up earlier. And if I were to ever talk down on functional testing, Nikolai, who's going to be speaking a little bit later, will give me a piece of his mind, because he is a professional when it comes to automation, and he knows better than anybody the value of functional testing. But it does exactly what it was designed to do, right? We talked about this before. I talked, and hopefully you listened if you're still awake. But functional testing was designed to test the functionality. It was designed to test the clickstream, a business process. And so it has these actions that drive the test scenario to get the UI into a state that you want to test it, and then assert something. It checks to make sure that your application is behaving in an expected manner based on those actions that you performed. And that's great. That's really valuable. But there's all these situations that Larry put up for us. I love those slides too. I was going to show them, but since Larry showed them first, I didn't want to be redundant. But I love those slides that he walked through of, so my functional test passed, but there were missing images. And then it has that emoji with the, oh no, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what you think. It's melodramatic, but it's also, if you're responsible for that application looking right and being easy to interact with, that's going to be your exact reaction. That's terrible. And if your functional tests don't catch it, you have no reason to think that's you're going to have broken links and images that are overlapping and missing images, missing elements, for goodness sakes. So the downside of the assertions is that they're only testing exactly what you've explicitly asserted. They only cover that small portion of the UI and really just the functionality of the UI, whether or not the element can be located and interacted with. And adding more and more of these, for those of you who are already automators, you'll understand that that's a tall ask. Not only is it a tall order to initially do from an upfront investment to add all these extra assertions, but you're talking about either writing a whole bunch of extra tests to test each of these assertions, which is a great practice. We're big proponents for writing small atomic autonomous tests so that each of these assertions, if any of those one small test fails, then you know exactly which assertion is tied to that, which functionality did fail, instead of having to dig through a big, 10, 15, 20-minute test to figure out where the point of failure was. But it's still a lot to ask. It's a lot of authoring, of test authoring. Anytime you add functionality to an application, it multiplies the number of tests that you're writing. Or if you're doing things in a way where you're writing big, long tests, then it makes those tests, it gives them more reasons to be flaky, more points of failure, a lot of reason for you to look and say, well, this is just it's unsustainable is the word I was looking for. It's so high effort. It's very high maintenance. And God forbid if you remove functionality or remove a web page from your application, and suddenly all those tests that you've been writing are just useless. So the beauty of functional testing, or of the beauty of functional testing is beautiful, but the beauty of visual testing is what it can add to that. So take both functional and visual aspects of the UI. It covers the traditional functional areas, and then also the areas that traditional functional testing can't cover. So we've got the increased coverage and the increased confidence, which, as we've been saying, is invaluable. Now, on top of that, the increased efficiency comes from the fact that you're not writing all those extra assertions, and you're not having to maintain test scripts that are unnecessarily complex, and therefore the tests that you do have are more reliable. They are, again, easier to maintain. I love this. A single visual snapshot can cover hundreds of assertions. And it's true if you think about it. Attach a snapshot to an existing functional test and test just that one functionality, that one assertion. And at the same time, you can be testing to make sure that every single other element on that page looks the way that it's supposed to. That is priceless. And this is pulled from the Sauce Labs visual testing solution specifically, but the idea behind this is that, and this is a saying that we're hearing more and more, is that a snapshot is worth 1,000 assertions. And it's what I just said, but the idea that a snapshot is a single line of code, and what that allows you to then do and see is invaluable compared to lines and lines and lines of assertions in your regular functional tests. And you can imagine even those functional tests coming from maybe a BDD framework where there's even more just, I don't want to be the one writing a BDD set of requirements that are, well, I want to make sure that this looks like this and that looks like that. And it's just not a model that's sustainable. It's going to create a lot of fatigue. So what I want to show next really quick is actually, this talk, my session isn't meant to really be very vendor specific, but I do want to give you a visual of what this can, visual, no pun intended, of what this can really look like. So I'm going to exit my slideshow, and assuming that you cannot see my notes and that instead you can see Screener.io. So Screener.io is the previous name of Sauce Visual. And so you can see Screener, now part of Sauce Labs. It's been part of our family for coming up on 2 years now, about as long as I've been at Sauce Labs. And so it's being integrated more and more into the Sauce Labs platform. You can already run tests using the Sauce Labs virtual machines, which allows you to scale. It allows you to do visual regression testing against a variety of browsers and versions. But what I want to look at is, Larry talked about smart hybrid diffs and how that's the technology that Sauce Labs uses. In each of these, what we're looking at, and I'll hop back into the dashboard actually and take a step back. What we're looking at is a dashboard. This is a build that ran. This is actually against a Storybook component library. And in this Storybook component library, there are 254 different component states. And that means that there are, X number of components, and then each state, it means that it's a variation on that component. There's all these different versions that, so a failed login banner versus a successful login banner, things like that. What we were able to do is run a single visual regression test. And once we've run that test once and gone through and accepted that things look the way that they're supposed to, what we would call a baseline, then anytime we run that test afterwards, we get notifications. The build will fail every time a visual regression is detected. And Larry also mentioned something that I'm going to get into about the different types of failures. So I'm going to scroll down. I've got one of my favorites, failures, is here under rejected. So what we're looking at right here is over on the left-hand side of the screen. This is the previously accepted state. This is the page or the component as it was intentionally accepted. This is the baseline. And then we ran this test again, and where the build executed. And what we see over on the right is that, oh, well, this page looks fine, doesn't it? It's not, things aren't overlapping, things aren't topsy-turvy. However, compared to the previously accepted baseline, we see that this banner has been removed. It is supposed to be there, and it's not. And depending on what the application is or the component, this could be business critical. It could be a huge deal. Maybe it wasn't part of the functional test flow, but maybe this is a critical item. This banner is really supposed to be here. Our other change is that when I first ran this test and accepted this as a baseline, it was 2019. Wow, it's 2021. Okay, it's been a while. And then when I ran this second time, it was 2020. So these are two very different changes. So if I open up some of the details, what I can see is that we have this structural change, and that's this highlighted area right here. And it is telling us exactly what happened. It's telling us that this div was deleted. And we can choose to ignore this if maybe it was supposed to be deleted. And so the new baseline is the same page, just without this div in it. Or we can fail this and we can reject it. We can, and then we can use this and go back to our development teams and say, hey, something happened. Some code commit changed this. Let's take a look and let's find it. Let's get it fixed. And just like that, you're good to go. And then on the other hand, you've got a content change. So content is what you would expect it to be. It's something, maybe text, that is supposed to change. So dates, for example, or if it's a banking application, maybe you're doing a visual regression test against an account statement page, and the balance should be able to change without the build failing. So these are the types of changes that you would want to be able to ignore dynamically and have it accepted that, hey, I want to make sure that this visual regression test is still running, but that this particular content change, or whenever this content changes, that the test still passes because it's not a reason for anything to fail. These are 2 out of the 4 types of changes that Sauce Visual will detect. So structural, content, layout, and I'm definitely going to forget the other one, and Hussein's going to get mad at me. But structural, layout, content, and there is another one, style. Thank you, Larry. And style changes. And by breaking these into these 4 different groups, it tells you more about what changed and potentially why it changed. So again, you and your the developers can go back in and identify what caused that change and rectify that situation as quickly and efficiently as possible. All of this to say, the promise of visual testing. Test both functional and visual aspects of the UI. Let's simplify UI testing by taking what you're already doing and making it better, making it encompass more. Let's not break your existing process because there may not be anything wrong with it. If what you're doing now is working for you, keep doing it. But there are ways that you can enhance that, and you can get more for your existing effort. One of the things that I love about the approach that Sauce took when developing its visual testing tool is that we wanted to build in, we wanted to make it integrate with Selenium WebDriver. Because to us, what that meant was that you could take a few different approaches. You could have dedicated visual tests, or you could leverage your existing test scripts. You could take the tests that you've already taken the time, the effort to write to make sure are running efficiently, and you add those couple lines. You saw, the assertions versus the snapshot. You just add those snapshots where you need them, and before you know it, you're getting these detailed diffs that are based on not only a pixel by pixel comparison, but also a DOM snapshot, and that allow you to have extra insight into how your application looks, feels, and functions. And this, in case you're not sick of us saying it yet, is how you're able to then deliver digital confidence, deliver an experience to your end users that you feel so good about. It's going to look and feel exactly the way that you want it to. And therefore, your customers are going to keep coming back after a good experience. They're going to bring their friends. They're going to bring their family members. I know that I do that sort of thing. So I know that that was a lot of talking. It was a lot of content. There was some nostalgia. I hope that you enjoyed it a little bit. Let me know if you bid on that Motorola brick phone. I'd like to see a picture.